Prime Minister was, just after lunchtime today, interviewed by Kieran Gilbert on Sky, and he was asked about Australia's contribution to peacekeeping efforts in Ukraine. Now, obviously, he's joined this coalition of the willing. Here's what the Prime Minister told Kieran earlier.
Australia has participated with the rest of the democratic world in providing military support. If there is a peace and if there is a global response to that in the form of peacekeeping, then we would consider any proposal at the time. That would be a matter for the Cabinet.
Joining me now, Credlin regular and Sky News political contributor Chris Heumann. Chris, great to catch up with you, mate. That's the first time I think I've heard the Prime Minister say that if there's a peacekeeping force that goes into Ukraine, if there is a peace deal worked out between Russia and Ukraine, that we'd be part of it. Should I be surprised about that? I thought that we were going to keep our boots on the ground out of there.
Steve, look, I think the Prime Minister has nodded in that direction before, but there's a pretty big hurdle to clear before that. If you're talking about blue helmeted peacekeepers, UN forces, then you're talking about it having to go through the Security Council. Well, of course, Russia sits on the Security Council, China sits on the Security Council, so it wouldn't be a UN peacekeeping force with any kind of teeth, and you don't want that kind of force in your country. What the Ukrainians want, I know, because when I was there more than 2 years ago now, was Americans on the ground inside the borders of Ukraine. That was the only way they believed that they could possibly be safe from Russia after this. Don't forget, Australia does actually train Ukrainian forces at the moment. We have provided them with lethal kit. So Australia has been on board in Ukraine's defence. But I note when the Prime Minister speaks about this, he never mentions the elephant in the room, and that is the force that's been keeping Russia afloat, or the country that's been doing it has been China. When he talks about the stability of the world, China has been buying Russian oil. That's financed Russia's fight against Ukraine, and there's credible evidence that the Chinese are assisting in other ways, in military ways, through dual-use technologies. So if we're going to basically have a long, hard look at Russia and the way it's behaving and worry about the world order, then we should be very, very worried about what China has to do in all of that. But of course, Australia will never raise its voice on that front.
You and I have been around long enough to know we've got a rich history in peacekeeping, and I had a quick look up this afternoon about how many places we've been throughout the world over the years. I think the last place was Cyprus, and we have used not just Australian military troops, we've used police as well, and I guess the most famous recent peacekeeping action was in East Timor. There still would be some disquiet, I believe, within the public that we get that involved in something like this on the other side of the world. I mean, remember, Chris, before we got out of Afghanistan, there was a lot of pressure on the politicians to bring our soldiers home from that conflict.
Yeah, I think though, Steve, you'll find that most of our support for these things has been largely symbolic in places where we really thought that it was going to matter, where we thought that our troops might be in some kind of danger. So yes, I think there would be a hurdle with the public there. I'd like to think that there would be, Australians would be well disposed to Ukraine, because I do think that there is a case to be made that Anthony Albanese was making, is that we should stand against a country literally just ripping away territory from another country unprovoked, which is what we have seen with Russia. But this has a long way to go before we get to peacekeepers on the ground, I think, Steve.
We'll get to Donald Trump's meeting in a moment. You have been to Ukraine. Are you still, when you look back at the visit there and then think about what's happened since and what's happened in all these years this conflict's been going, amazed that Ukraine's been able to hang on? I mean, in the first week, Putin said he would take 3 days to get to Kyiv.
Yeah, it's been remarkable, and the remarkable thing has been the resolve of the Ukrainian people, and I don't think that everything that Volodymyr Zelensky has done has been on point, but I will say this: it was his decision to stand and fight and not accept a free pass out of the country which was offered to him, which helped the people stand and fight. But don't forget, they'd been preparing, because of course they'd seen the attack on Crimea. They had actually been preparing their defence forces, and one of the things that they had was a resilient public. If you wanted it, you could go to a police station and get a gun on day one and go to the front line and fight, and that's what the people of Ukraine did. I think they are inspirational, but now they're negotiating from very difficult circumstances, and at the moment they're not being negotiated with, they're being talked about by the United States and Russia.
Yeah, on that, Zelensky's in the White House tomorrow. He's taken some European support with him now. Obviously, he's got France with him, the UK, Germany, and the leader of the European Commission. I presume that's to give him some muscle in the meeting to avoid perhaps another dressing down by Donald Trump in the Oval Office. Do you think we're any closer, really, realistically, Chris, to getting to some sort of peace deal without Ukraine losing some of the territory that Putin's already taken?
I think that's precisely what Donald Trump will offer him, is that it's not just the front line that we're seeing now, which is not in Ukraine's favour. It's beyond that front line to take a large part of the territory of Ukraine, which is something that Volodymyr Zelensky would never be able to give up. I mean, he'd be completely crippled at home if he gave up too much of Ukraine's territory. So now he's between a rock and a very, very hard place. The pressure is being put on him. The united front from Ukraine, from the Europeans, is to try and put pressure back on the President of the United States to not make demands which are completely untenable to the people of Ukraine and to the government of Ukraine.